So the question that comes to my mind at this moment in regards to implementing habits. Are you creating a space, perhaps environment, for those habits to dwell? Because if we think about it, we all have a desire to implement good habits into our lives, into our journey. And since that is the case for many of us, these desired habits that we want to implement, they're looking for a safe space to dwell in. They're looking for a wonderful place to dwell in, a comfortable place to dwell in. So I feel like it will be very noble of us to create that environment for them. And with that being said, I think about the famous movie line. And many of us, we are familiar with this movie line. If you build it, they will come. So let's talk about it. In this video, in this episode of the Growth Times Infinity podcast, we are going to discuss the importance of environment when it comes to our desired habits. So let's grow and let's go. Speaking of environment, in chapter 6 of the book Atomic Habits, there were at least a couple of quotes that stood out to me. And one of the quotes in that book, in this chapter, was James Clear, who's the author, he states that environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. And when I think about that quote, I think about one of my go-to quotes. And this particular quote is something that I hold near and dear to me because this quote has been a constant throughout my life. And that quote is, "You are a product of your environment." Because if you think about it over the years, throughout your life, we have all been a product of our environment. Growing up as a young lad, when you was in your household as a child, you think about, your living situation, you think about your parents, you think about living with your family. The habits that we implemented, even as a child, was based on our environment. How we acted, how we move, the food that we ate, our behavior. It was all because of our surroundings. It was because of our environment. Growing up as a child, our teenage years, when we was hanging out in school, the other teens that we hanged around, we implement certain habits because of our peers. In our adult life, our family, our jobs, our home life, the habits that we implement is because of our environment, of our surroundings. So with all of that being said, when it comes to our habits, our desired habits, many of us have a hard time. We have a challenge implementing new habits. One of the reasons we may be having a challenge is because it's time for us to reevaluate our environment. Because we've always been a product of our environment. And since that is the case, if we're not in a place in our lives already, it's time for us to become the architect of our environment. When it comes to implementing desired habits. It's time for us to create that space the way it should be. Many of us know about another quote, or maybe a visualization in a sense, is that if we want to capture butterflies, it may not be ideal to chase butterflies, but it's much easier, it's more strategic to attract those butterflies. And how do we do that? We create a garden. For some of us, perhaps it's time for us to become the architect of our environment. That's if we want to implement certain desired habits. So it's time for us to create a space of convenience. Let's make it easy to implement our desired habits. Now, let's take writing, for example. I want to use writing because for me personally, I do have a desire to write more. I want to do more journaling. I want to write articles. I want to write notes. That's what I want to do. That's what I have a desire to do. And this is something that I'm working on. So if you're like me, and if you have a desire to write more, whether you want to journal or if you want to become an author, here are a few suggestions. To write more, it's probably ideal to set up a space in your home. You can utilize an extra room. You can create a home office. You may not have to do that much. You can create a space in your house. You can create, maybe a writing corner. You can use a part of your bedroom. You can use a part of your garage. There are a number of ways, if you have a desire to write more, there are a number of ways we can set up a space. We can set up our environment in order to accomplish that goal. And there are a number of other examples how we can create a space of convenience. Now, sometimes we do come across challenges when we are creating an environment in order to implement desired habits. That can happen. But yet, let's have that understanding that creating an environment is very important when it comes to implementing good habits, our desired habits. So if the challenge presents itself, another way we can go about it is identifying our current environment. There may be some clutter. For example, in the book, James Clear mentioned that sometimes certain parts of the environment, we may be utilizing it more than what we should. In other words, here's another quote that really just stood out to me. And these are the words of James Clear. And the quote is, "The mantra I find useful is one space, one use." So before I go into that a little bit more, if we feel that our current environment is cluttered, it's time to refine and rearrange our environment. Once again, James Clear's words, the mantra I find useful is one space, one use. And when I think about that quote, the thing that comes to my mind is our electronic devices. our electronic devices. Now, I've come across a few people who have two phones. And when I've come across this, I wonder to myself, why do this person got two phones? Why do they got two phones? What do they need two phones for? And I think about it from a perspective of if you have a spouse, if you have a significant other. Ladies, maybe you can relate. Let's say your husband, your man, they have two phones. Now, I feel like some women would feel like, why my man gotta have two phones? And even the men too. If your wife has two phones, you may be wondering, why do my significant other have to have two phones? What's going on with that? But what I discovered with some people is that they have two phones because one is for personal use and one is for business use. And it seems that it's starting to become a common thing now. So the way I used to think about it, now I think about it differently. I get it. And I think about that, and I think about this as well. And we've talked about this on multiple occasions, how the first thing we do, one of the first things that we do upon waking up is we'll pick up that phone, we'll pick up that electronic device, and we'll, check emails, and we'll check maybe text messages that we may have missed from the day before or overnight or whatever. We'll check our social media upon waking up. So I feel like what can help with that is that having one use for each electronic device. So you could have two phones, maybe even more than two phones. I'm not familiar with anyone who have more than two phones, but maybe that is the case with some people. But not only the phones. If we think about electronic devices in general, if we think about our phone, maybe having a second phone, and along with that, having our iPads, having our electronic tablets, laptops, desktops, that type of thing. One of the things that we can utilize in regards to our desired habits, what James Clear says about his mantra being one space, one use, and how we bring this whole environment thing together, the importance of environment when it comes to implementing our desired habits, how we bring this whole thing together. It comes to electronic devices. We can use one phone for personal use. We can use one phone for business use. And instead of using our phones for emails and social media and maybe some other things, maybe we can use social media on our iPads or our electronic tablets. Maybe we can only check our emails on our desktop computer. Maybe we can do our business work on our laptops. I feel like that is a very efficient way to manage your workload. And just in general use. That may be ideal for some of us. Not to use all those things on one or two electronic devices, but sort of spread the wealth, if you get what I'm saying. So I feel like with that, my main takeaway from this chapter 6 of the book Atomic Habits, truly is the importance of our environment and how we can create a space for our desired habits. Let me know what you think. Peace and blessings to you as you continue your journey. So I would love to receive your feedback. In this video, we talked about being a product of our environment. And I feel like with our desired habits that we want to implement in our lives, it's very important that we create a good environment, an ideal environment for those habits to dwell in. It truly is time for us to think about becoming the architect of our environment so we can be a great product of our environment. Let's create our own environment. So let me know what you think. Once again, I would love to receive your feedback. My encouragement to you, my question to you is, what are you going to do going forward in your journey in order to create a better environment for your desired habits? Feel free to leave a comment below. Feel free to share with me your plan of action, your course of action, as far as what you're going to do in regards to that. I look forward to receiving your comments. I am Reggie B, aka The Growth Advocate, and I appreciate you all tuning into this episode of the Growth Times Infinity podcast. And until the next time, keep growing and keep going.